if you could return to 1948 and describe something that you've mentioned, the Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic. What was this event? What was this displacement and dispossession of Palestinians in 1948?
Well, like May 15th, 1948 is commemorated every year as, the anniversary of the Nakba. But I would even argue, and I think this is like a very popular idea, is that the Nakba did not begin or end in 1948. The 48 was rather, a crystallization of the Zionist enterprise in Palestine. And what happened was is that many Zionist paramilitaries that, again, today merged and made the Israeli army, which calls itself the Israeli Defense Forces, even though they're literally always the aggressor, um, committed atrocities and massacres, and they destroyed over 500 villages. They killed over 15,000 people. They forced a very large portion, a majority of the Palestinian population, to flee their homes. And this was, the near total destruction of Palestinian society that continues on to this day. We refer to it as the ongoing Nakba, and you see it in Sheikh Jarrah, you see it in Silwan, you see it in Hebron, and all of these people losing their homes. And in many cases, time and time again, I grew up and my grandmother told me the stories about the Nakba. She told me stories about her neighbors who were running away in a panic, and they had mistaken a pillow for their offspring, and they just took it with them, and they realized later that they forgot their child, and they came back for it. Many people who were separated from my grandmother herself, she lost her husband for a few months, for 9 months. He was imprisoned by the Israelis. She told me all of these stories, and she wasn't just reminiscing about them. She was, letting me know that this is still happening. And I didn't need to grow up that old to see it happening in my own front yard, to see that expulsion happen in the same fashion she's talked about it. But, now they have replaced their artillery with the judiciary. They have replaced, the slashing of the pregnant women's bellies in the Deir Yassin massacre with laws that say, you're not legally allowed to be here. We're going to kick you out of your home. And it's happening, and it has happened in broad daylight. One piece of context for the listener who is not familiar with the Nakba is the Balfour Declaration, which was a promise, quote unquote promise, made by the British to the Zionist movement in 1917, committing to the establishment, I'm quoting, I think, word for word, committing to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, as if Palestine was, the British to give away. And there was this whole movement that called for colonization of Palestine. And there were different schools of thought in Zionism. People like Zangwill said that this was a country without a people. And Palestinians who have existed there, who have cultivated the lands, who have, had diverse cultural and religious and political practices, they were completely erased. And other people like Jabotinsky were a lot more explicit and a lot more honest, and said that we need to fight the Palestinians because they love their land, much like the Red Indians love their lands. And he had a paper called "The Iron Wall: Colonization of Palestine Must Go Forward." And all of these schools of thoughts were then shopping around for, imperialist support for their cause. They tried to get support from the Ottoman Empire. They tried to get support from Germany, and this is in the 1800s. And then they got support from the United Kingdom. A great book to recommend is the 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. That traces the Zionist movement, oftentimes in the Zionist's own words. And so today what we're seeing is a continuation. And people like Jabotinsky, who are like profoundly and explicitly racist, who have called for genocide, who have called the Palestinians barbaric, who have said and done racist things. Jabotinsky also was like the founder of the Irgun, one of the other militias that later merged to become the Israeli army, which was responsible for the Deir Yassin massacre, which was responsible for the bombing of the King David Hotel. This is a person who's still celebrated in Israeli society. There are still streets named after him, and Netanyahu, just 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, honored him in a public celebration. So this is Zionism. It's not even through my own words.
What do you say to people that describe Israel as having a historical right to the land? So if you stretch not across decades, but across centuries into the past.
This kind of thing is a red herring. It's a distraction because you don't think of any state as having rights. But there is this exceptionalism to the Israeli regime where it has a right to defend itself, and it has a right to the land, and it has a right to shoot 14-year-old boys because it thought they had a knife in their pockets. A lot of the time people cite the Torah and cite religious books, and sometimes Zionists will even say like read the Quran and blah blah blah. Regardless of whatever was written in these books that were written thousands and thousands of years ago, the fact of the matter is no one has a right to go on slaughtering people, removing them from their homes, and then continuing to live in their homes, continuing to drink coffee on their balconies, decades and decades later, with no shame, with no introspection, with no reflection. No one has the right to do that. No one has the right to keep an entire population of people in a cage, which is what's happening to people in the West Bank, who have no freedom of movement, which is what's happening in Gaza, which is blockaded to water, air, and land, and is deemed uninhabitable by human rights organizations like the UN. No one has a right to do that.